Booyakasha! What it do, students? We are here picking up where we had left off. All our strategies are working. Our postman tests are working. We had some wonky issues going on with some of the typings, but that is to be expected when I try and do some things on the fly. And unfortunately, when I try, especially to prepare an idea and then decide to change it mid-recording, it never ends up well, but that's development. I'd rather not make it seem like I have perfection all the time. As a matter of fact, looking right here, if y'all been following along with this course and video, then unfortunately I forgot right here this done function to actually call it with whatever error takes place, but I'm sure y'all would have figured that out pretty quickly when you would have undefined or weird error happening when you would use your Passport JWT strategy. So I fixed that little guy right here, right off the bat. This video's focus is going to be fixing that typing issue, fixing little bugs that I caught in my process and my workflow here, trying to do it on the fly in a time crunch yesterday. Come on, Luke, why would you do that? You need to be professional. I am nothing but the height of professionalism, so yes. All right, so some thoughts on these interfaces and why I had to do what I had to do yesterday. I think it was in the pizza or maybe the login router. Yeah, so everything here is fine and dandy, and over in the login router, we had to run ATS ignore because it was not happy that rec.user.id didn't exist on what we would define as our payload, or rather what it's expecting on our rec user, because our rec user, by this authenticate local piece of code right here, actually is coming from our local strategy right here. So it will simply take the user found in the database. So whatever the user row is, that is what serializes as the rec user, and we just made sure to always delete the user password if it existed before it got any further out, in case of, not in case, just for security purposes. We always made sure that user password was deleted no matter where it came from. So something else we could take into consideration is that we could simply have our payload back over here in our interfaces, our payload interface. Rather than having to write these things down inside of here, what we could do is, for example, email is something that's existing in our users table already, but we're going to be adding the potential uses of user ID and role on our payload, so I could simply choose to extend this one by the users table. And if I'm not mistaken, that's actually what we ended up looking for, and everything is now fine and dandy. There's no reason to throw ATS ignore to tell TypeScript to temporarily ignore a problem. TypeScript now understands that the possibility of that payload contains everything that already exists in the users table, which will be, go to definition, everything of ID, email, password, and created at are all possibilities from the users table, and the payload may also include some things that aren't in that table. So kind of meshing those two together is what allows us to write stronger code here. Our rec user now also can be several things, because when we try and change our JWT strategy from being stateless, which is as long as it has the correct verification secret key and is not expired, then it should be trusted. But that's a stateless approach. If you wanted to go to a stateful approach, that's the point of this video. I'm going to show you one way to potentially change that here, or not this video in particular, but rather an incoming video. So I don't necessarily want to make the stateful approach part of the labs. I'd rather have everyone code a stateless approach. So the stateful approach I might actually delay until like a temporary option video, or here's how it would look. And honestly, it would just be taking this payload, looking up a value on the payload, for example, the user ID, attempting to match that in our database, and making sure everything is in sync. And that's, I told y'all, that's the easiest way to swap it over from a stateless to a stateful approach, by simply now incurring an additional query in this try catch block in order to verify not only the secret, the expiration date, but also that this payload has the most up-to-date and in-sync information from the database, because this payload might represent somebody's claims, but if that person's supposed to be banned, then we have to catch that somewhere, and we can do that with a stateful approach. So that might be a video down the line that shows y'all how easy it is to swap over if you need to do that, for example. Okay, so that fixed up our typings. We simply told TypeScript that our payload interface is going to have all the properties from this existing users table interface, and that it'll also be including these two additional properties, which aren't things in my database, which is why I don't want to go down to my users table and just try to include that down there. And since the payload is kind of more encompassing in the strategies than my users table, I might consider up here, instead of users table, I might just consider using the payload type, since the payload type does contain the users table and more, because this rec user serialization will be utilized by both the local strategy and the JWT strategy. So that actually tells TypeScript a bit more accurately what it's to be expecting right there as well. So there you go. Okay, so I mentioned that after that basic strategy stuff, I will talk about wrapping and writing your own custom middlewares around this. As a matter of fact, I've already gotten a few points and questions going, okay, what if I do want to customize the functionality of Passport's default system? There was a screenshot in our Discord channel going, hey, how can I customize this default unauthorized response? And I was like, this series of videos is going to do that. But for now, before I get into that, we'll make that the next video. This one's more about just kind of clearing up some of the, again, mistakes I made in the last video. And rather than reshoot that one, I'd rather be transparent and honest. Like I said, everyone makes mistakes. You just get better at debugging them. Because literally, I ended that recording, went to a meeting, went to work out. In the middle of the workout, I was like, why did I do that? It's so obvious what the solution should have been. But at the time, talking out loud and in slight panic mode, I came up with just the solution of ignoring the problem with TypeScript and just letting it go through, because I know the underlying code would work fine regardless. So, in today's video, we are instead going to add a new feature that, makes sense when you see it, but when you're first starting out can be kind of hard. We had this login configuration going, and now it seems to me that we probably also want to know how to register users, because that's not going to require any kind of new code that you don't know, and it's going to also require this token functionality, because in the real world, and some applications still do this, they have a separate workflow. Once you register and the credentials are set and things are verified, you still have to go back to a login page and now log in with that account. But if you wanted to make a workflow that registered and logged somebody in, remember, this token is the proof that somebody logged in. So if they create a new account and generate their new password and stuff like that, the response is going to be the exact same. This highlighted code right here is going to be the same response from a registration type router. So what we can do before we go to the registration router is that we know this portion here might be reused in some form or fashion. I could choose to move it to a function, or we can just copy and paste it between the two. We're going to find out when I get there. So let's make a new router. Right here. I'm going to copy the login router. It's going to have a lot of similarities, believe it or not. So we're going to paste that here. We're not using any kind of Passport middleware, so rec user won't be needed here because we're not serializing a user by the time we get here. We're not going to have this authenticate local middleware placed on it, so that saves us that one right there. I'll be signing and making tokens, so I'll need both JWT and my config right there. That makes sense to me. And okay. All right, so we know this payload is not going to work because we don't have a user's ID yet because, well, they're registering. We don't know what it is yet, nor their email. But these bits of information will be available once we get going. So as with all things, I'll go ahead and comment this part out and just switch to a simple response. Maybe some kind of register test response, just so I know it is indeed working. Now, if we're going to be registering someone, that implies we're inserting them to our database, so I'll go ahead and make sure I have my DB connection. Ooh, that's some. How do I always hop on camera to record and random weird noises happen in my background? I don't know if my microphone picked it up, but there is a storm rolling in, and I'm going to, I'll be sad, but I'm going to try and laugh if lightning strikes this house and I lose power. I swear something like that would happen to me. They don't call me Lucky Luke for nothing. Nobody calls me that. Anyway, I'll have my database object imported. That way I also make sure I have my async keyword right here as well, so I can await some asynchronous stuff. Good to go. Okay, let's test this register test response. Register test response. But I can't do that as of quite yet because I haven't indexed it yet. So we're going to head over here and do some cool kid copy paste. So check that out. You can click at the end of your line in VS Code, do a quick copy paste on those two lines, and watch this little trick. I'm going to hold Option on Mac or Alt on Windows, and I'm going to place a text cursor at the end of every one of those logins I want to replace. Delete those characters, type in register, boom, super speed right there. We go ahead and index that like nobody's business at all. So I'm going to pop back on over to Postman. drop down our post request, localhost 3000 /auth/register, like I've done this before, and click send. We got a register test coming back. Everything seems to be, oh, what's it all unhappy about here? Ooh, password does not exist on type payload. Yeah, it does. I altered all that stuff, yo. I said the payload has all that information with the users table and all these things. Interesting that it's blowing up, even though VS Code was totally fine and dandy with this information here. Interesting. All right. Man, these things never go the way I expect them to, do they? But wait, man, that doesn't make sense considering it's completely happy about that stuff there. So why would my terminal area be here throwing the errors? So hold on. Sometimes if you, I don't know, with my autosave feature, it doesn't quite kick on and interpret like some of the changes I had made. Yeah, I was about to say, I fixed all those TypeScript problems, so I'm not sure why Webpack was showing me that I still had those errors up here. That's peculiar. So no panic, no changes. Just for some reason, my Webpack output was thinking I didn't update my typings. It might just be a TypeScript and Webpack issue. When I had changed the type and saved it, it didn't actually trigger a recompile or something like that. But just making sure we're all on the same page. That was a little weird tidbit I had there with my Webpack not compiling with TypeScript for some reason. That was odd. Okay, so told you that fix should have worked, and I'm sitting here like, do I have to reshoot this video again? Come on, man. All right. There's our register test, and what are we going to be registering our users with? And remember, back in our schema, the only required tidbits of this particular application were going to be somebody's email and somebody's password. And so we're going to have to take someone's password and generate into the Sultan hash, which we've done in this video series already, and conveniently already had that functionality that we can import and be good to go. So that's no problem there. This will be auto-generated, and I'll show you how to retrieve it. The email needs to be unique, and they're going to register with it, and they're going to have this generated timestamp. So it should be pretty easy. Just 2 values we have to bother inserting. So where are they going to come from? The request body. So we're going to do the following. I might just call this the new user. Is going to be a variable that represents the rec.body. Now, this may seem kind of overkill, but you saw me do the same thing over here in well, I didn't in login because I did it that way. Normally, you tend to not mix your what's called networking layer, like your routing information, into your data layer. So I shouldn't take the rec.body and chain it directly into my insert statement. I should use this variable called new user to manipulate it instead. So watch this. We know that new user is going to have an email they're going to register with and a password that they want to register with. So what I'm going to do is simply say, take my new user's password. It'll be plain text. I'll be using password 123 again. And what I would like you to do is run, what did I call it anyway? Generate hash. So there's that auto import functionality I can use from TypeScript. My favorite thing about it, in all honesty, not the fact that it makes me a better developer, it makes me write stronger code. This helps me auto import things real clean. So it's going to take the new user's password. Oh my goodness, what happened there? Autocomplete not helping me there. I said new user.password. And there it is, right? So remember, the right-hand side of this assignment will be evaluated first. So it's going to take their current plain text password, Sultan hash it, and reassign over itself on the new user. And let's do that by simply echoing back our new user variable to ourselves to make sure this does what we think it does. More lightning. Ooh, it's going to be a fun day. So raw JSON on my registration route here. Email. I can't use test@test.com because that, well, I mean, I can right now, it won't matter, but I'll say register@test.com. Let's just do a registration email right there. And then the password I want to register with will be the one I always use. I try and be consistent, so on whatever project I'm developing, I can always do something at test.com, like guest at test, admin at test, regular user at test, register at test. Like I always do at test.com, and I always do password 123. And that consistency lets me A, make these videos faster and more consistently, and B, makes it so no matter what project I'm working on, I don't have to go and look up documentation or go to the database and try and remember, what did I register with? I can't remember. So being consistent is always a nice thing. So I'm going to click on send, and look what it echoed back to me. It did not say register at test.com, password 123, but rather the email is fine, but this got replaced by the salt and hash we all know and love for our security in our application. So, fantastic. All I need to do now is insert that information into the database. So, if you I've used that a lot this video, haven't I? So, I just did it again, not thinking about it. This time, we're going to take a look at something interesting. In my models in my database, again, interfaces that represent tables, I had written up this one. This MySQL response is the default response from the MySQL library when you run an insert, update, and delete statement. And we're about to run an insert statement. So I'm going to head to I did it again. I'm going to head to my queries, and we had left the insert one empty, but I did code it up to use the MySQL response as the generic type that it received. Check this out. It's easy to write this insert statement. Insert into users, the following columns in the following order. The email will be first, the password will be second, with the following value, and we can do question mark like that to prevent SQL injection attacks. These will be the email and password arguments I'm going to pass in. Right now, they're not coming from anywhere, so I'm going to format my page here a little bit. Head back to my function arguments and say the email will be a string and the password will be a string for this insert statement to do its job. And that right there is 100% correct. But why not show y'all off something kind of cool and maybe something kind of new? Why not? Why not? Might be kind of fun. Imagine this. Real world scenario. You got a buddy that works in a lab. They're using an Excel spreadsheet, and you offer to build them a site to help them insert this information, maybe even graph it out and visualize it. I've done a little side project like this before. Maybe you're coding an application that has a pretty big registration form. Like my buddy's lab project I had to work on, he had almost 25 or 30 different fields that he had to insert to the database to track a whole bunch of data during his research. So, I gotta get away from that word. Thus, all right, forget it. I'm not gonna think about it. I'm not gonna overthink it. So, this is fine for like 2, 3, 4, 5 escape question marks. But do you really want to have to manage 30 individual arguments in a form that has 30 fields? Do you want to have to write 30 columns in this parentheses set? Do you really have to want to write 30 question mark lists inside of this one value array? Do you really want to have to pass 30 individual arguments into this escape array right here for SQL injection protection? I mean, if you're answering still nodding your head and saying yes, then what is wrong with you? No one wants to do that. So there is a cool shorthand syntax we can do to scale our code, but it does come with trade-offs, my favorite concept. This is fine. You control each individual value, whether it's 5 or 30, you have to write them all, and they are very specific to get the job done. Let's learn the opposite of that for some shorthand. We'll say we're going to pass it an object of a type called new user that is an object with the following things. Surprise, surprise, it has an email string and a password string on it as well, just like that. We're going to pass in just an object that has those two properties on it, and watch how this changes our syntax. I can even drop the escape array and say, just take the new user as the escaped value, but how's it going to know what to do with the 2 question marks? It won't, so watch this. Insert into users, set question mark. That right there is some extremely cool shorthand to know how to do. So how does it work? Let's take a look at what our new user is going to look like as of right now. It's going to look, well, just like this. Actually, just copy that JSON object. Here we go, like this, yeah. It's going to take that object right there, what our new user currently looks like with an email and password properties on this here object we're looking at. That's our data that represents new user that we're trying to insert. And what does it know to do here? Well, what's really cool about objects is that it's going to take each key and value pair and split them and join them back together with equal signs. So it's going to take this value and comma and simply replace the colon with an equal sign like that, okay? It's going to do the same thing for this hashed and salted password, including no comma at the end, because an ending comma can mess things up. Split it with an equal sign. It's going to take this insert into user set, place it before or after the word set. It's going to place all this stuff it's been splitting in half. It's going to replace the question mark with that split and then rejoined object into these values it needs to do. And guess what? That is another way of writing insert statements. It looks kind of like an update statement, doesn't it? So it can take an object of 30 properties, like for my buddy's application that had that many fields, and appropriately split them to run an insert statement that looks so much cleaner to scale with. But let's talk about the trade-offs of this decision. What if my request body begins having the token on it? What if I start doing body style tokens? I know that's not what a token looks like, but if that property is on this object, it's going to attempt to come over here and add it into my table as an insert statement. And we know that the token property is not a column in my database. So it will simply scale to whatever properties are on the object. So if your object has properties that aren't part of your table, you're going to have to sanitize it before you pass it in. Delete this property or make a copy of the object of email and password, but not these two down here. So again, these things come with trade-offs. Everything does. You're going to have to pay for your decision one way or another, and that's what we have to pay with this one if we decide to get even fancier. So, as long as our new user object has the correct two properties, it will always split and insert the way it needs to. With that information in mind, check this out. New user, the rec body right now, has the email, has the password, only two properties we need, so guess what? Await our database users queries, our insert query to take the new user variable, insert it to the database, and now, because of my insert statement having this MySQL response type on it, this is where we can get result.insertID. This variable result, it can be anything. It could be pizza for all that we care, right? As long as it has this strong typing on it called MySQL response, or at the end of the day, it's just an object that has a insert ID number property. So if you want to strong type it that way, that's fine too. It has a property called insert ID that tells you what just got inserted into the database. And that is the ID of our user down here. So I'm going to take this pseudocode, or it is code, and replace rec.userid with result.insertID. That is who just got inserted to the database and who this token is going to belong to. Instead of rec.user.email, it'll simply be new user.email, the one they just registered with, and we'll still default them to this random arbitrary role thing we just made up right there. So I get to comment this back in, format, if my code has to get formatted. Can't send two responses, so get rid of that old test one, and voila. Y'all have a registration route that also would log in a user right away. Let's give it a shot. So down here in my Postman test, send away. We got a token. Head to the users table. If you're curious, select star from users. Wrong project yet again. Use that one. Back down to this, execute, and there we go. We have registered our new user today, 3 days later. Awesome. Now, what about a test? What if I try registering again? My code sucks, let me know. Okay, well, hey Luke, your code sucks. Thanks, guy. We can head to our server-side console log, and it tells us what the error happens to be, which is duplicate entry, register at test.com. So that also confirms to us that our unique property on our tables is not allowing the same email address to register. Probably something you want to do before you run that right there. So very cool to know how to do that. Is it case sensitive? That's a good question. I think I talked about that. And thankfully it is not. It's not case sensitive. Whether it's capital R register or lowercase r register, it considers that the same password, which is good for us. That way some automated script or bot that I maliciously write to play with y'all's projects can't simply arbitrarily capitalize in lowercase letters in this email and start registering a bunch of bogus accounts. That's good that we have that level of sanitization on our database with one little keyword on our schema called unique, which is really good to know. Yeah, so that's really wrapping it up for this registration router. You would simply make sure that your new user and rec body had the appropriate values. Make sure you never store a plain text password. insert that to the database. If you insert that, you get a result object, and that result object has two properties we really care about, one called insert ID and one called affected rows. That's good for like delete and update statements, because if your affected rows is 0, that means your query ran with no error, but it didn't match anything in a where clause, so it affected nothing. That's not an error, it just ran and didn't do anything. So if your affected rows is 0, you can write a conditional that tells you that for your error handling or your application workflow. But if your affected rows is 1 or more, depending on what you're doing, like deleting multiple things, updating multiple things, it could be 1 or more. If that value is 1 or more, then success, your code worked, and that's how I use affected rows. But insert ID is the best one to know, and affected rows is good to know, but not as necessary to know about as insert ID is. And that just comes from not us coding anything. That is just the default response of this sucker right here. This library just by default codes it that way. It will respond with an object of some metadata. That's all it does. All right, that wraps up the logic of the register router. All you gotta do is build a form on your front end that sends a rect body with these two things in it at least, and you can have whatever fun on the front end you want. And that's the gist of how to register someone and log them in at the exact same time, which again tells us that we can probably abstract the signing of the token. Because what happens if I decide to change my expiration date? I'll have to remember to go and jump between login and register to make sure that the day changes on that. We got a couple choices. Check this out. I can always go to my environment variable file and make that scalable. Make that 15 days expiration date right there. Go add it to my config index. Expiration. Process.environment variable. .jwt expires. I had just written it and I forgot what it was. Unbelievable. It is expires, right? Expire. Let's change this one. Expires. There we go. Yeah, come on, save it. There we go. I forgot my comma. Let's just make it consistent, Luke. Come on, man. Come on, man. Make it consistent. There we go. Expires, expires, expires. Quit changing up words, dude. So now I can come down over yonder and simply replace this with config.jwt.expires. Take and copy this value and also make my login router do the same way. That way it scales between the two files without me having to remember to jump between login and register and change a string value. It's coming from what I call the single source of truth. Another option is, yeah, you could totally just take this code and move it into a function called create token if you would like, but this is just as simple and easy because now everything is working the way it should. Excellent. So that'll about wrap up this video going over the registration router. Again, nothing too necessarily complex that y'all wouldn't be able to come up with, but it's one of those things that when you're a newbie, a lot of these concepts are hard to grasp initially until you've written it a couple times and added it to a couple projects, which that's how you're going to learn auth, unfortunately. It sucks the first go around. The second time ain't so bad. The third time's even easier than that. And fourth time and onwards, it feels fairly natural and you'll get what you need to do. And that's how I learned it. And that's how over the last couple of years teaching, I've learned is the best way to teach it. There's not a lot of logic. I mean, I can teach y'all how the workflow goes and leave y'all to come up with the code. But in this case, I have to give you some kind of like a bowling lane, like put up the gutters so you can still throw it down the aisle and figure out what you want to do. But I give you all those gutters, those bouncing gutters to make sure that at the very least, as long as you have this and this written and our strategies written, you have the ability to throw a strike on your own without my help. But at least I gave y'all some gutters to keep you in bounds of good code that's pretty dang secure. No plain text password storage, generating a nice hash and salted password and making everything come together fairly well no matter where you want to implement it. So hope y'all enjoyed this video, and I'll see y'all in the next one where we begin talking about making our own middleware functions that take what Passport currently does and customize our responses. See y'all there.